My panel is here in the arena, CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams, Republican pollster and CNN political commentator Kristen Soltis Anderson, former senior advisor at the DNC and also CNN political commentator Sochi Hinojosa, and former Republican congressman and, of course, Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry. Elliot, I want to start with you on this because the sound bites, obviously, they are angry, they are aggressive, they are making clear that this nuclear arms race is not going to stop anytime soon. I think to start, though, explain to people what options the Democrats have right now in what has been a year-long back and forth.
Well, not a lot, and the options are going to vary from state to state. Some states, and I think this goes back to what the founders wanted with how they crafted elections in the country. They're administered at the state level, and so if someone has a challenge to how a state is running its elections, they have to sue in that state. Now, you're going to just see different outcomes based on the timing in which states redistrict. You're going to see different outcomes based on how the states went about redistricting. A great example is the state of Virginia, which the state Supreme Court just struck down what happened there because of the manner in which they did it. A different outcome might happen in a different state. So we are really entering a bit of a wild west of what the path forward will be for everyone as we head toward 2026 and, more importantly, 2028.
Yeah, and the context, of course, is beyond the back and forth that started with President Trump and his team, and then Democrats seem to not just even things out, but almost end up on top, and now it's back the other way, and it's very hard to keep track of. There's a Supreme Court decision in there as well, obviously, that's triggering a lot of the efforts in the South. So Democrats right now, it felt like 3 weeks ago, Democrats were looking at each other like, I can't believe we won this. Mm-hmm. And now, what's kind of the mood right now in the party?
Well, I think the Virginia decision was a shock amongst the Democratic Party more broadly. But I think that if you're talking to Democrats, and especially if you're talking to leadership in the Democratic Party, they still believe that they will win regardless of Republicans cheating and trying to redraw the lines. I mean, they're going back on the reason why they are likely to win is because things are very bad for the American people right now. Gas prices are up. Grocery prices are up. People were stripped away of their health care. Health care is more expensive. So, I mean, it is issue after issue. It is very clear that Donald Trump wanted to redraw the lines because he can't have a record and redo his record. And so the Democrats believe that if it is on the issues and if it is on the way voters feel like right now, and if it only gets worse from now until November, that they end up winning regardless of these redrawn maps and back and forth.
Go ahead. I can see you.
Yeah.
You've got thoughts. Feel free to share them,
I've got
Mr.
thoughts.
Speaker.
So coming from the state of North Carolina, where we've had 30 years of continuous litigation about our congressional, state house, and state senate maps, and having lived through 5 out of 7 election cycles where we had new maps in North Carolina, as a direct result of Democrats suing. And it was Eric Holder who, with the help of President Obama, have raised money in order to do redistricting across the country for nearly a decade. And their terminology was sue till it's blue. So the countervailing effect here was President Trump and his political team said, well, we have the option to redraw these districts in Republican states and try to maximize the map. This is a result of what all the parties have been doing for a very long time. It is not new. And the Voting Rights Act is not actually about voting rights anymore. It became in the last 30 years about drawing majority-minority districts that disproportionately benefited the Democratic Party. And that is why the Democratic Party is very upset about this, is because in Republican states, they no longer have the ability to sue till it's blue. And now you have Wild West. I think I agree with you, Elliot. It's a Wild West. But we had the Wild West for 150 years in this country for redistricting. Now we're back to basically that same sort of outcome here.
I want to bounce off something that you mentioned, Democrats being upset about the Supreme Court decision and the majority-minority districts, which have really been kind of a cornerstone of the Congressional Caucus, to be frank, for the better part of the last several decades. And this is what Hakeem Jeffries said about the ghosts of the Confederacy. Take a listen.
This unprecedented assault on black political representation, the likes of which we have not seen since the Jim Crow era, the ghost of the Confederacy has afflicted the United States Supreme Court majority and is invading and haunting the nation right now, and we take that seriously.
Kristen, I want to start with you. I want to ask Elliot about kind of the legal repercussions and, frankly, the context legally of what you just heard. But in terms of this issue, the black majority districts that are being redrawn right now, we just saw one member retire, Steve Cohen, who is not black, but represents Memphis because of Tennessee changing its maps. Does it resonate with the electorate? Is this an issue that fires up one side or the other?
Well, this is one where, putting on my pollster hat, I can imagine writing a question that would get 80% of Americans saying that they think the Supreme Court's decision was terrible, and I could write a question that would get 80% saying they agreed with it. And what it fundamentally comes down to is, do voters think that the law should prescribe that states must create representation for racial minorities? Republicans would say, you know what, I could get 80% of people to agree that we should not have laws requiring that you draw districts for any kind of racial representation reasons. On the other hand, I think that the idea that this is now going to reduce black representation is something that for Democrats, it's obviously going to fire them up. And as we head into the midterm elections, it is right now Democrats that have a huge enthusiasm, sense that there is, the stakes are unbelievably high in this midterm. They're going to crawl across broken glass to vote. Republicans right now aren't feeling the stakes are quite as high. In all the data I see, their enthusiasm is lower. And so while you could imagine this issue getting messaged on either side, right now it is firing up Democrats much, much more.
Goes to the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Look, if you've talked to conservative legal school of thought people for the better part of the last several decades, you knew this was where they wanted to go.
Right.
But what Jeffries is saying there.
Yeah, that's strong language, but let's be clear, and we should have a little bit of a history lesson here. It's no secret as to how the Constitution was drafted and how our laws were drafted for most of the American experiment that led to a disproportionate number of black representatives in Congress. Like, this goes back to why we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, was to rectify a lot of the racial inequities in how districts are cut up, how people vote, how people are allowed to vote, and how their votes are suppressed. The Voting Rights Act in 1964 was specifically written to rectify some of these problems, and then re-upped in 2006 because they were seen as still existing. And so the idea that this is really just about Democratic districts and doesn't still carry at least some of the vestiges that it did for most of the American history, I just don't think is fair. And that's where, you know, Speaker Jeffries uses the language that goes to the Confederacy. You can draw a straight line from 1865 all the way, to some extent, to 2026. And so this idea that this is just about politics, I think is only part of the story. There is a racial element to it. And yes, across much of the South, black Americans typically tend to vote Democratic, but there are also black people who are losing their representatives, and that's why we have these laws in the first place. So I just think it's a far more complicated issue than just, we're just trying to put more Democrats in, and this is really just a power grab by Democrats.
Well, and it's also pretty rich in a state like Texas that Republicans, the entire reason that they decided to redraw the lines is because they believed that they did better in the last election with Latino voters, and then therefore the line should reflect as much. What is happening is that the Republican Party is losing massive support with Latino voters all across the country. The numbers this year will not look the way that they did in 2024, and so it's their excuse here was a racial excuse. Their entire reasoning for redrawing the lines, but that is just not going to be the case moving forward.
I think it's
also, likewise, just to be clear, right now the Democratic Party thinks that this is a total loss for them. And I would say, as a Republican, it is not. I think there's an overstatement by Democrats at the loss of their opportunity in this election cycle. And I think Republicans' enthusiasm that this could save the House is probably not significant enough given the environment we're in.
Yeah, and what Democrats can do before 2028, if they want to, if this continues going down the road, it feels very much like the judicial wars on some level, where I remember Mitch McConnell saying, you're going to regret this probably sooner than you think. We'll see how it goes. All right.